Keith Carter is the athletics director at Ole Miss. He joins us right now on the Farm Bureau phone line. Check out favrates.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. It is Sports Talk Mississippi. Keith, appreciate a few minutes of your time this afternoon. Really just kind of wanted to get your perspective of where things are right now as we get closer and closer to the start of football season, now just about 5 weeks away.
Well, I think obviously, Richard, we're getting closer to the time where we got to make some decisions, and I think that's what we talked about here over the last, few weeks, and we met in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago and kind of set that end of July time frame to make those decisions, and we're here. We had a call today and had a really good conversation about some options for the season and different things, and so hopefully we can continue that dialogue and make those decisions as we get it toward the end of this week or early next. But we've got to start deciding, what that looks like, and certainly then there's some other dominoes that will fall, after those decisions are made.
How much at the league level is the SEC working in concert with the Big 12 and the ACC? I don't know if unified front is the way that it's got to be described or not. I thought Bob Bowlesby said it well yesterday when he said our plans don't have to be identical, but they can't be incompatible.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to look at it. I know Greg has done a really good job of communicating with both of those leagues, and certainly a few weeks ago when we saw some decisions that were made, we wanted to make sure that, one, as the SEC, that we made the decision that was best for us. And at the time it was to wait and get some more information. I think the Big 12 and the ACC felt the same. And, I think it has been a good dialogue between the leagues. You think about it, there's a lot of really intriguing matchups between those three leagues, this year, and trying to hold on to those games as long as we possibly can to see if we can play those games and what that might look like is a good thing, So who knows where we end up? Hopefully, we'll have that decision here in the next week or so. But, I think it's good that the three leagues have kind of, continued on a parallel path and had those conversations and obviously making sure what's best for their respective leagues.
It feels like the SEC and the Big 12 in particular have held on to the idea that preference would be to play a 12-game schedule. That feels kind of unlikely. I don't want to put words in your mouth on that front, but even if there's not like a final decision on a plan in place, what are kind of the options that are on the table right now for the 14 SEC teams in terms of scheduling and what this might look like?
Well, I think what you said there with playing the 12-game schedule as normal, is everybody's first option. And as we get closer to making this decision, as you mentioned, it becomes a little less likely that that's probably where we end up. But I think there's some options there that include a revised schedule, a shortened schedule, whether it's 8 games or 10 games. Whether that's a conference only or a combination of conference and a reduced amount of non-conference games. All of those are there. And then obviously there's still the option to punt and play in the spring, which, I don't think that's an option that really anyone desires, but you got to leave it on the table. So those are all the things that we're talking about. And again, hopefully those decisions will be made here sooner rather than later.
Keith, they're kind of two parallel tracks that are going on right now. Keith Carter, athletics director at Ole Miss, visiting with us on the Farm Bureau phone line. But those two parallel tracks absolutely have to work together. So it's one of can we play? Are we going to play? What's it going to look like when we play? And then the second piece of that is what the schools are having to individually deal with their states. Fans in the stands. How do we make that work? Saw the news yesterday from Governor Bryant and Dr. Thomas Dobbs saying that there'd been a lot of communication between those offices and your office and John Cohen's office, Jeremy McClain's office at Southern Miss. Where are we in terms of what you feel like the state is willing to allow or work with you on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it just shows there's so many layers and how complex this whole situation is. And, I think that once the SEC kind of puts their foot on base and we make the decision on what the season is going to look like, I do think that plays into the conversation of, the individual states and what that looks like. If you're, potentially playing a conference-only schedule, is that a safer environment potentially as these teams are tested, maybe better and those type of things coming in and out of the states and into the venues. When you start talking about, capacity and fans in the stands, we've had conversations with Governor Reeves, and he's been very, very receptive to, a lot of those conversations. But he's got a big task at hand. He really does. He's got to make a decision that's best for the state, and he certainly understands the value and what college athletics brings to our state and our local communities. But he's got to make a decision that's best for the long term and the long run. So we certainly respect that and understand that. But I think if we were to play tomorrow, you'd probably my gut would tell me you'd be in that 25% range, of stadium capacity. And, our hope is that these cases will plateau and start to head kind of the right direction, and maybe that percentage could go up. But, who knows? We'll see. I think yesterday he even threw out the 10, 20, 35%, ranges. So, he's certainly, kind of evaluating all that, and we'll certainly adhere to his guidelines once he decides, what he wants to do. But, for us, we understand that, the medical part of this is so important, but we also understand that, the economical piece for our local communities and those type of things are part of the conversation as well.
Keith, when you and I talked a couple of months ago, you told us that you had done modeling and that 50% capacity would likely cost the athletics department $10 million. I think 25% capacity was like an $18 million cost. How do you absorb that?
Well, again, there's a lot of ways to do that. I think in any scenario where you're under 50%, it's not a great situation. But, for us now, it's about kind of salvaging the season. It's about, surviving and doing those type of things. I think there's some options for, maybe some donors to help, some other sources of potential revenue. Obviously, additional cost-cutting measures that we have that we could put into place. But, I think not just for Ole Miss. There's just a lot of athletic departments right now out there kind of looking, for these answers. And, I think as these dominoes start to fall, then we can kind of start working toward a, more concrete goal of what we're looking at. So, again, I think the next 2 weeks is, kind of the understatement of the year, but very, very important on what this all will look like. But we'll be prepared for really any scenario.
Is there an overriding desire, maybe is there consensus among the ADs to play a conference-only schedule versus maybe a +1 model where you're able to preserve some of those non-conference rivalries and play some of those other marquee games that you mentioned earlier? Does it feel like there's a strong consensus in one direction or the other?
I think there's still a lot of discussion, honestly. As we talk today, I think there's still several options on the table that are attractive. And, I do think that if you go to a conference-only schedule, you take away a lot of the variables that could come into play. You get more flexibility. If you did have an outbreak in week 3 or week 4, you have obviously all that autonomy and flexibility to stop games and pick games back up when you need to. And it's just a conference decision at that point. So I think there's some advantages to doing that. But obviously, as I mentioned before, some really cool matchups out there that we would love to see happen. Obviously we played Baylor and, Florida and Florida State, Clemson, South Carolina. There's just some matchups that are really cool and have been great for college football. So you hate to see those go away as well. So that's just why these decisions are really tough. But ultimately, I think we've got to make the decision that, will allow us to not only start the season, but finish the season. We've got to make the decision that makes the most sense for our league and gives us a chance to have a full season.
I said something yesterday. Major League Baseball, I'm sure you've been following along other sports as well. They had the outbreak with the Florida Marlins. They're the only team that's had an outbreak. And I went kind of a different direction yesterday and said, if Major League Baseball is able to control this ultimately, then yesterday could potentially be a good day for college football because it shows you that you don't have to shut everything down just because you have a single outbreak. Do you look at it that way, or am I off base on that?
I look at it the same way, Richard. I mean, I think that it's as we've talked about this for the past several months, we've always talked about, looking at pro sports and different models and how we can learn from that and those type of things. And I agree. I think that this is something that, I'm sure MLB, just as we have anticipated that there would be positive cases and that these things would happen. But now how they adjust to it, how they, shut things down temporarily and hopefully keep things going, that's big, and I think that's something that we can certainly learn from and take into our experience as we get into our season. So, I think it's big, and I think, as the NBA cranks up here this week, there's just certain other models that we can look at as well that will give us data. So, again, I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to, in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago, kind of push this thing down the road a little bit, because we've learned that every day there can be new information, and I think that this thing with MLB could be a pivotal part of this.
Keith, only about 15 seconds left. In your mind, is there a drop-dead date on when a decision has to be made on what the season's going to look like?
No, I don't think it's a drop dead, but I think we're getting close, Richard. We've got to do something here soon so that we can allow these other dominoes to start falling. So I anticipate it's going to happen here sooner rather than later.
Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.